Ben, you're having so much fun.
So real.
Good evening. My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. My sobriety date is November 3rd, 1994. I am also the co-author of Our Happy Divorce, How Ending Our Marriage Brought Us Closer Together. The main reason I wanted to write Our Happy Divorce is the exact same reason I am so open about my recovery, and that's to give people a little bit of hope that things can be different. This month, September, is National Recovery Month. SAMHSA describes it as a national observance held every September to educate Americans that substance abuse treatment and mental health services can enable those with mental health and substance abuse issues to live a healthy and rewarding life. Now in its 31st year, Recovery Month celebrates the gains made by those living in recovery. So tonight we are here to celebrate National Recovery Month by helping break down the stigma through education and awareness. And to help me do that, as always, I am joined by my co-hosts, Susan Guthrie and Kate Anthony. Susan Guthrie is the founder of Divorce in a Better Way and host of the Divorce and Beyond podcast. She is a top family law attorney and mediator with over 30 years of experience. Kate is a divorce coach and rock star. She helps women navigate the tough decision of should I stay or should I go. She is also the host of the award-winning podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. So please help me welcome Kate and Susan.
Yay!
Where are you guys? There you are. Hi. I got it right.
You got it right.
Got it.
That's a first. I always take out the guide part of it, right?
The Divorce Survival podcast.
Yeah, right.
So about 4 months ago, we did a live stream titled Drugs, Alcohol, and Divorce, and our guest was Dr. Elizabeth Cohen. We are lucky to have Dr. Elizabeth Cohen with us again. Where is she?
She's here.
But first, I got to give the spiel.
Oh, give the spiel about her.
All right. Dr. Cohen received her PhD in clinical psychology from Boston University. As part of her graduate training, she treated clients at world-renowned Center for Anxiety and Related Disorder in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Cohen is the recipient of the prestigious American Psychological Foundation Research Award for her doctoral research. Following her time at BU, Dr. Cohen completed her pre-doctorate internship at Bellevue Hospital and New York University Child Study Center. She was asked to become the director of CBT program at Bellevue's outpatient psychiatry clinic. I hate that word. Dr. Cohen has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, NBC News, Women's Health, HuffPost, Thrive Global, and Good Housekeeping. So let us welcome Dr. Elizabeth Cohen. And that's a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Doc.
So happy to be here. Love being with you guys more than anything.
One of the reasons we're so excited to have you with us is because you bring a unique perspective. And that's one of obviously all the educational and professional work you do, but also in the field of experience. And I think that that's one thing that is so unique about what you bring with the experience and the education. So you mind sharing a little bit about your experience around alcohol, drugs, and all divorce and everything we're talking about?
Sure. My personal experience. Yeah. So in addition to working with hundreds of women and men who are going through divorce, I myself went through a divorce, and I always say I'm grateful to have divorced and been married to an alcoholic, because it allowed me to dig deep and figure out what I needed to do to shift my life. It would have been easy to say all of the things that he had done to hurt me or hurt our family and take his inventory. But instead, I stopped and thought, how did I find myself here? And so I'm grateful for his alcoholism and his disease, not for how it hurt him or my family, but because it really allowed both of us to get clear and true on what was right and what we needed.
And, one of the things that we talked about before the stream started, that I found that this is not only National Recovery Month, but it's also mental health and suicide prevention awareness. And you, Susan, had Dr. Cohen on your podcast, and bring up some really good conversations. Do you want to go into that with her?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. It's actually the episode that went live this morning. So if anyone wants to hear the episode itself, which I really recommend, because, Dr. Elizabeth really gave some great advice on, what to be aware of with depression and anxiety, what to do if you feel you have some of the symptoms, and a great deal of wisdom around suicide, because it is National Suicide Prevention Month. But one of the things that we're facing in our lives right now is the what I called it the perfect storm. The name of the episode is The Perfect Storm, because the incidence of anxiety and depression are up. And in the face of the big increase in divorces that are being filed reportedly, it's up 34%. And then in the face of COVID, which alone is responsible for a threefold increase in diagnoses and symptoms of anxiety and depression, it is a perfect storm. This is a time in our lives more than ever where we need to be aware of our mental health and protecting it. And we need to be aware of the mental health and the needs of those around us. And we need to reach out for help if we need it. And we need to be there to help others if they need the help. So Dr. Elizabeth did a beautiful job in this episode, really walking us through anxiety, depression, and the interplay of them all and what can be done. So it's a wonderful episode.
And where can people find that?
That's at divorceandbeyondpod.com.
And one thing about suicide prevention, we did something on our radio show a couple months ago and talked with a clinical psychiatrist around it. And one of the things that resonates, or I remember about it, that really stuck with me was the idea of somebody reaches out for help. I guess I'd been guilty of it before, of telling that person, my first instinct was it was going to be okay. And what that person said was, no, that's not what you want to say. And Elizabeth, you want to talk to us, if somebody reaches out for help, what you want to tell them?
Yeah, I love to talk about that. I think that talking about discussing suicide in any way is so often taboo. In fact, people are usually afraid that if they say something about suicide, that they're going to give the person the idea to kill themselves.
Right.
I said very clearly on the podcast, and I love sending this message, like, if someone is going to hurt themselves, it's not because you asked them if they were going to do it. They have been thinking about it. They have been focusing on it. They have been ruminating on it. So suggesting it is simply saying that you're concerned about them and that you understand it might be a possibility. And people who are suffering to the point where they really believe, and this is a real belief, that choosing death would be better for them and everyone around them, that kind of deep pain, think about the deep pain that's the only solution. It's these people who are contemplating suicide are not stupid. They're not ignorant. It's not like they haven't tried other things. They simply feel that hopeless. Mm-hmm. And so to feel that hopeless, you have to meet that hopelessness with a realness of, I get how you're feeling, and you right now see no other option. So as you said, Ben, if you came in and met that hopelessness, with, have you tried to work out? Or, have you,
right.
have you called a friend or something?
Take a bath.
You're right. Take a bath, get a manicure. It's like you're totally missing where that person is. And so I want to encourage people, don't be afraid to go there, because that person is there. And the only way to help them is to really be with them in that space of how much pain they're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting in my first few meetings, and when people said the amount of time they had in recovery, I literally thought they were lying, because it was so far from my reality. And the only conclusion I could make that made any sense was they had to be lying. However, I kept showing up and doing the work, and then things slowly started getting better. And those people with more time gave me hope that if they could do it, so could I. And 26 years later, here I am sober. And the emotions and feelings of desperation and hopelessness were identical to those when I made the decision to get sober, as they were when Nikki and I decided to make that final decision to get divorced. So in you guys' professional and personal experiences, am I way off by drawing those parallels? And if not, what can we learn about substance abuse recovery and divorce recovery that can help us? And Dr. Cohen, you want to take it first?
I love what you said, Ben, about one day at a time, one step at a time. I mean, I think that can that can really apply here in both divorce and in substance use and in suicide or depression. That when we look too far ahead and figure out how am I going to get to the place where I'm happy again, like maybe that's not where we're going to try to get. Just like when you're trying to get sober, you don't think about like never drinking again. You think about, can I not drink in the next hour? Or can I not drink or use in the next 2 hours? And when you're going through divorce, the women in my program, I recommend, how are you going to get through the next hour? What are you going to do? We're not talking about how you're going to handle divorce court in 3 months. We're talking about how you're going to get through just today. Right. So I think focusing on every moment and getting through it, first of all, that makes you have a success, right? Like you got through the day, which is actually a success. And when you're feeling hopeless, you feel like you don't do anything well. So that really balances that out. And so I think that it's a great parallel, and it's really the only solution, which is to take it really slow and be incredibly gentle with yourself.
Kate, you want to add anything to that?
No, not to that. I think that what Elizabeth said was, I mean, spot on. And, you know, I've been on sort of multiple sides of this coin. I think if a coin can have more than two sides, right? As a sober person, right? All around the rim, all around, right? But, you know, as a sober person who got sober, you know, almost 2 years ago. So there's that, right? And you're absolutely right. For me, sobriety was not, I'm never going to drink again. It was like, what would my life look like if I didn't drink today? It was definitely more of it was more of a commitment to myself to not drink for a period of time. I was afraid of saying like the rest of my life. I was like, I don't even know what the fuck that means at this particular juncture, but I know that I don't. And so, you know, people would offer me a drink and I would say, I'm not drinking right now. And then it was, I'm not drinking. And then it was, I don't drink. And now I don't drink. Like, that's just, you know, the progression of it for me. You know, and then the other side of this that I've experienced is, you know, as the child of, ex-wife of, and all of that, of all the alcoholics around me, right? And you know, my first foray into recovery was on the other side of this, in the codependency Al-Anon world. And man, I think that's probably the hardest recovery I've ever done. Way harder for me personally than quitting drinking. For me, the codependency recovery was that was like the rubber meets the road, and some of my deepest, darkest times were in that realm. Except, and I will say, I don't share this very often, and for no other reason than I don't really. It's not that relevant a lot, but I did have a brush with suicidal ideation, and that was one of the scariest times of my life. And it was chemical. You know, it was because I was on too high a dose of my antidepressant. And I got to tell you, it was, and I didn't know it you don't know it. You don't fucking know anything when you're in that space, right? So the idea of being like, oh, if I could just identify it, then I can change it. I couldn't identify it. All I knew was that I literally, my son's in the other room, like I just wanted to die. And the only thing that, honestly, truly, the only thing that kept me from doing it was my son.
Right. And that's what the research shows. The research shows the only thing that will keep people from doing it is to say, you will completely screw up everyone in your family and even people you don't even know. I'm sure people who are listening to this have had the experience where you go on Facebook and you see that someone you went to college with killed themselves and you think, why am I so devastated? I don't even know them. But it impacts you in a way that you can't understand it until it happens to you. And that's because we're not physiologically, our main goal is to stay alive and to survive. So when we something, it is totally counter. And so literally our brain and body doesn't know how to metabolize it. Sorry, Kate, I interrupted you.
No, you're absolutely right. No, it's actually, thank you. I appreciate that. It's true. It was so shocking. And then, something led me down the road of of changing my meds. That's really, and I don't even remember how it happened, but it was really happenstance, right? But truly for like a week or two or 3 or a month before that, if it wasn't for him, for my teenager, I probably wouldn't be here, because I was just so convinced that that I just had nothing. There was nothing to live for. And it was so, I don't know how to describe it other than like chemical. Like it wasn't like I couldn't attach it to any reality.
Yeah.
In hindsight and retrospect. Right. But in that moment, it was deadly real.
And I think that's, one of the things I brought up with the parallels is that, when you're going through it and in the beginning of divorce and there's just so many emotions of, first of all, at least I felt on both, this hopelessness, like, am I ever going to get better? Am I ever going to, and then slowly but surely, and the amazing thing is if somebody had told us, when you look at divorce, if somebody had told their story, of Nikki and my story to us when we were in the beginning, I would have said, you're full of it. There's no way, right? And it's the same sort of thing with the sobriety. I didn't believe these people. I didn't believe it was even possible that somebody could go, 1 day without using, much less 30 days, years, multiple of years. And slowly the process of healing and the process of working on yourself and realizing that the drugs and the alcohol weren't really the problem. Right, they were just symptoms of the disease, and I think that is a lot of this. Again, parallels with divorce, at least for my process, was I had to deal with the emotional side before I could deal with the business side or the other side of the process. And I think that's one of the reasons. One, that I'm still here sober, and two is that Nikki and I wrote a book called Our Happy Divorce. Susan, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, what you just brought to my mind is something you and I have talked about, Ben, as one of the keys to the success that you and Nikki were able to have a happy divorce is, I think of it as you gave yourself the space and the grace to deal with the emotional content before the two of you buckled down to the business side of it. And to Nikki's credit, she gave you the space and the grace as well. And you took that time to do the work. So it's a multi-layered, process there, but space and grace doing that. So many people, they make that decision, and Kate probably knows this, being the person who walks people through making the decision. But sometimes when people make it, they just throw themselves into the process headlong, like it's got to be done. I got to start it. I got to do it now. And really you need a little time to process. You need a little time to get your emotional content under control. And most of us can't do that ourselves. We need a Dr. Elizabeth. We need a Kate Anthony. We need to read Our Happy Divorce and know that it's a possibility, and maybe read it 10 times, because it probably would take that many times in those early days to believe it, right? Like you just said. But that's,
that's so well said. And the program that I go to particularly, and even the treatment center I went to, they said, well, first of all, it's a pretty easy deal. All you got to do is change your whole life, right? But then it was followed up by don't make any major life decisions in the first year, right? Yeah. And there's rationale behind that, behind that reasoning, and quite frankly, is that I'm not in the right mind to make any right decisions. And I think that goes for the divorce process too. Is I wasn't in any right mind I could make decisions, but they surely wouldn't have been, one, for the benefit of Asher, or in the long run, for the happiness and well-being of Nikki and I personally. In our last live stream, we talked about the lack of ability of the courts to handle or understand addiction. Unfortunately, I feel like society is also ill-equipped to handle the disease, but maybe that's for a separate conversation. Kate and Elizabeth, from a coach-therapist standpoint, how can we address this issue in an informed, solution-based way? Kate, you want to go first?
Within the court system?
Well,
I mean, no, right. I mean, I think that what Susan was saying is the best thing that you can possibly do is do not jump in. Don't jump straight from making the decision into making the biggest legal and financial decisions of your life while you're in this complete emotional turmoil, because then the court system will get its hooks into you, or the litigation system will get its hooks into you, and you're going to go down a litigation path that will probably cost you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. That's, unnecessary for you to have to spend if you actually take that time to process. Again, you're right. You're not in your right mind. I remember when I first got divorced, and my therapist told me when I started dating, immediately, because I was going to find a husband like right away. And she said, you can consider yourself for the next year and a half to be certifiably insane. And, she's not the only therapist that said that to me. And so that's the mind. And let me tell you, can confirm based on my dating history in that first year and a half, I can 100% confirm that I was certifiably insane. And that's the point at which you're going to make all of these huge life decisions? Like, no, because it's the same brain. It's the same completely fucked up brain. So put a pause in that. Put a pin in it. Get yourself right in your head, in your brain, psychologically, and then go from there.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at, is that it needs to be dealt with outside of the courts because they're ill-equipped. So, Dr. Cohen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's coming to mind, too, is that the courts do not have compassion for the disease of alcoholism. They don't have compassion that it is an illness. We talked about this in our last live stream, that people use alcohol to manage emotions. They use alcohol because it's the only way they know to move through really painful feelings. And the court simply sees it as a crime, even though drinking and drugging is not a crime. And certainly drinking isn't a crime. I guess you could argue that acquiring drugs is a crime, but they treat it as it's a crime as opposed to a symptom of a mental health issue. And so I have seen this so often where in court, once there's alcohol or drug use involved, as both Susan, and Kate were saying, then the whole system focuses on that. They just miss everything else. And while I think that might need to be addressed again as a mental health issue, there's a whole other host of issues going on. It's like the court just then zooms in on that, and you lose, maybe Susan, I imagine you agree, then you lose this whole other part of the story that's really important to understand.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the problem is the court, to say that they're ill-equipped is understating it, right? Because the courts, we're lawyers. We went to law school. We didn't go to med school. We don't know. I've learned in 30 years of being a divorce attorney, I've learned a heck of a lot about addiction and mental health. You know why? Because people with mental health problems are often in the court. Yeah. People with addiction problems are often in the court. So I've learned about it, but it's not like we had a course in that in law school. So a judge sitting there on the bench is looking at the behaviors and the end result of the addiction. You smashed a car, you picked up your kids drunk, you didn't pick up your kids because you had been arrested. I've seen it all. And so the judges only have the ability to work with the end result, and they can't diagnose, and they can't treat, and they can't. All we can do is order people to go to treatment programs. But you both know, it's like ordering someone to go to therapy, right, or ordering someone, to do anything.
It's not for people who need it. It's for people who want it, right? So
it's 100% true to say the court system is not equipped. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be where you go for legal resolution. And unfortunately, when divorce especially, but it comes in other areas, but divorce is an area where we take, the intersection of law with emotions and how mental health and personal, health.
Right.
And it just doesn't mesh. It doesn't blend well.
So Susan, is mediation poised or in a better position to deal and understand the disease?
It really depends, like in anything, with the professional you're dealing with. But the one thing that I would say is I've had a number of mediations where we have had addiction be an issue in the divorce. We've had one or the other parent who is in the throes of an addiction, and we've been able to incorporate a mental health professional or an addiction specialist or both right into the mediation process, literally coming into the room where we can have that conversation. First off, we would have, a proof of sobriety as they come into, they'd probably have to do something like SoberLink or, some sort of a breathalyzer or something, depending on what the drug is. But then we've had like planning sessions on how a parent, a co-parent is going to get on the track to health, and so the other parent can hear it as well. So we're addressing it as a family system. And in my experience, at least, again, as a legal professional, that has been much more successful than when I've gone as a litigator into a courtroom and had a judge order somebody else to go to treatment.
Yep. I was telling Susan when we were talking that I had this very concerning call from someone who I work with who said to me, it's been recommended to have a psychiatric evaluation and to see a therapist, but will that look bad if we go to court? That was really concerning to me because I think people would hide mental health issues, alcohol struggles, because, as Susan is saying, because they're ill-equipped and they know that they might miss something or misinterpret it. And that is just heartbreaking to me that someone wouldn't get the help because they were trying to have a better case in court. Oof.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that too, where people are like, that'll look bad. It'll make me look crazy. As opposed to, it makes you look like someone who actually cares about your mental health, the safety of your children, like holistically, as I think Susan said, as the family system, right? That this could be viewed in any way other than someone putting the health of the system at the center and as a priority is it's horrifying.
So obviously substance abuse doesn't just affect one person. There's no question in my mind that substance abuse and marriage troubles are inextricably linked to one another. In your experience, how many marriages end because of substance abuse? I mean, I think there's a stat of 25 million people are suffering with addiction. So if you figure in the United States, is it as large as I would imagine?
It is in my practice.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's, again, I don't know if it's just what I attract because of some of the things that I talk about. I think that all of us are in this realm, right? We're all, supporters and in the recovery world in one way or another. And so, this is something that we talk about because we have experience with. So maybe we attract those people. But my guess is it's really a huge piece of it. Right. I think it's a huge piece of it for millions of people. Millions of people are suffering with this. I don't know anybody who doesn't have alcoholism or addiction in some branch or most branches of their family trees. Like, I just don't.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say too. I was going to say, first of all, I'll never forget being in a meeting and someone saying we're all affected by alcohol, even if you don't know someone who in your family who's drinking, because the people who are making laws for us and the people who are making decisions about things that are important have meetings when they're drinking. So I thought that was so fabulous and such a great reminder. If you've ever been, how many lawmakers have a, whiskey when they're talking to a lobbyist? Like, that means alcohol is impacting you. So that's one thing that I just thought was so brilliant. And in my experience, in my practice, and in my program, I noticed that most people are impacted by either active drinking or what we call dry drunk, right? Or or the dry.
Oh yeah, the dry.
Yeah. The dry codependence, right? Like the codependents that are not recovered yet. So the impact of substance abuse is rampant, and it makes sense, right? I mean, the reason what alcohol does is it dissolves the ability to communicate together, to work together, and to work as a system. That's what I've always loved in the rooms. My favorite are the traditions, because I really, growing up in an addicted home, I didn't know how to work as a group, because the substance users in my family focused on what they were using and themselves. And so the ability to focus and be a partner and be in a family is really, I think, really eroded when you're having a substance use problem, because your substance is your family and is your thing and is your partner. So it makes perfect sense that would go along with divorce, because you're basically supposed to be connecting to someone, but you have a lover on the side, which is your substance. And so therein, you can't ever really be fully connected.
I love that. Yes. So well said. I love that.
It is really well said. Now, I'll tell the dry drunk story too. But Susan, do you want to add to that in your experience? I mean, is it as not rampant, but as big of cause for the ending of marriage?
Oh, I mean, whether it's the cause of the end of the marriage, I mean, it's really hard to say that. I would say clients come into my office and say, I can't take it anymore. My wife's an alcoholic. My husband cheated on me. The affair is the reason for the breakdown, the breakdown of our marriage. We've always said, happy people don't go out and have affairs. So it wasn't the affair that broke down their marriage, or, an unhappy marriage. Same thing with the alcoholism. Is that the only thing that really brought it to an end? Who knows? But I will say that in my practice, more than 50% of the divorces that I've been involved in, I would estimate, had an alcohol or substance abuse issue. I would also say more than 50% had adultery as an issue in those marriages as well. So I think it's all, first of all, drunk people don't make good choices about who to sleep with, by the way, or make right?
Good decisions, right?
I don't know what you're thinking about, Susan.
Pardon?
I feel attacked.
It's all about you, Kate. We're just this is an intervention, actually. It's not really a live stream.
Katie.
Yeah. Sorry, I got the message a couple years ago, Ben. It's fine. I just don't have sex. I don't drink or have sex, so it's great.
I told you to call Bella.
I did.
I see a reality show coming on. It's so, you bring that up, and it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. I mean, one thing that in our story, or my story anyways, is, people, when they hear about my recovery, automatically assume that the reason Nikki and I broke up was because of drinking and using drugs. And unfortunately, I said this last time, but I don't have that excuse. Right? I was 12 years sober at the time, or I should say 12 years abstinent at the time. And it was a result of stopping working on myself. And I think that's one thing that, whether it's mental health or addiction, is you don't ever graduate from having to work on yourself. And in my case, I stopped working on myself. And the result was, just as much damage and actions as an active alcoholic, right? And that's selfishness, and it was all I thought about, and all that stuff. So, the alcohol and the drugs are just the symptom, and I think we've talked about it, but I don't know, Kate, if you brought up the dry drunk, but or Susan, but that was my case, and like I said, I wish I had an excuse.
Yeah.
One other thing that that was brought up, because I watched the live stream. Again, if you want to watch it, it's on our Happy Divorces YouTube page. But there was a woman who asked a question. By the way, if you are watching and you have any questions, you have millions of dollars of free advice here with Susan, Kate, and Elizabeth. So take use of it while you can. But she was saying about her husband, who was an alcoholic and got sober, and was sober for 2 years, and they were still married. But then she got they got divorced because she didn't know who he was sober. And that was the reason for the divorce, because, you know, and I don't know what that is about, Elizabeth, but is that something common that marriages fall apart once people get sober as well?
Yeah, well, so first I just want to start with this idea of like, who thought that someone you meet maybe in your 20s is the person you're going to want to be with when you're 20 years later? Like, let's just start with this first assumption. Like, whether they drink or don't drink. Like, who came up with that idea? Oh, I don't know. People who were trying to figure out property. Like, it never came from love. Like, I don't know. If I said to you, like, will your best friend be your best friend in 20 years? You'd probably be like, I don't know. Right. And so, first of all, I think, you know, a big part of my work is really challenging the stigma of divorce, which starts with challenging the stigma of that marriage has to last forever, and that you have to be perfectly with the person. And, you know, so this woman might have also just realized she didn't like or want to be with a person for the rest of her life, whether he was drinking or not. So I just want to kind of like give a blanket, like, that's okay. That's okay to do. And in fact, if we were more comfortable with doing that, maybe, as Susan said, like, we'd have fewer affairs, and we'd have fewer these long extended, should I stay, you know, or should I go? I mean, maybe if there was just more acceptance, absolutely, right? Yes. And so I would just say she realized that, but it's brave as hell to realize that something isn't working for you. That's the piece. Like, that's what I think needs to be really focused on, whether it's you need to stop drinking, you need to end your marriage, you need to get some help because of suicide or depression. Like, that's the brave move, not sticking something shitty out.
Yes. And I want to add
There's our therapist, people.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to add to that too, right? You know, is that you get to make a decision. Like, I have people who are like, he's amazing. He's the best dad. He's a great guy. I'm just like not in love with him anymore. Or I just feel empty and dead inside. I'm like, that's okay. You know, like you said, maybe this has run its course. Maybe you chose him at a particular time in your life and now it's different, and that's okay. You get to choose. You get to be happy. And, you know, back to Ben's question about the other person is that, you know, also often I will say that people who are in relationships with active addicts often spend so much of their time, Elizabeth and I know all too well, trying to get that person sober. And once they're sober, we don't really know who we are anymore in this relationship. Yeah. So we have taken on one role in the relationship, which is get our partner sober. And once their partner's sober, we're like, well, shit, now who am I? Totally. And that's where our work really begins. You know, that was how the Al-Anon program was started, was that all the wives of all the guys who started AA were like, oh.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
What about us?
And they did that, right? They used to I love the story. They'd drive them because all those guys had lost their license, and they'd have to wait for them after the meeting and sit there and think like, oh, you do that too? So you do that too?
In the kitchen making coffee and baking cookies for the husbands that they had to drive to their meeting, and they were like, wait a minute.
Right. We need this too.
What is wrong with us?
What's right? Maybe we should take a look at those steps that they're talking about in the other room. Right?
Totally.
And so, yeah, I think it's as common as, you know, these programs are old.
Right.
Such a good point.
So, you know, one thing that I just want to, you know, let people know is if you are struggling or know somebody who is struggling, we'll flash this a couple times, but allegedly we will. Hold on. There we go. SAMHSA, which is a national government organization, the national helpline is 800-662-HELP, 800-662-HELP. And that's for confidential. I know people might freak out calling the government, but it's, you know, confidential 24-hour, 7 days a week hotline. for both mental health and addiction. It can give you resources on where to go and who to see. So we'll show that a couple times.
And can I also mention that the suicide prevention
yes, please.
Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK, TALK, and that's also 24/7. There's always somebody there manning the phone. So please, one thing that Dr. Elizabeth says a number of times in the episode of Divorce and Beyond is you are not alone. You are not. So reach out for help. It's 1-800-273-TALK, TALK.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure people know that.
That's one thing that we talked about last time that I just found, so interesting is the codependency, and then there's the alcoholic, right? When Kate and Elizabeth, if you could give some advice to somebody who either, a husband or wife who is divorcing somebody who's struggling, how can they break away from, and obviously, hopefully that person will reach that point where they want it, not because, they need it, obviously, but what advice do you give that person on how to help themselves?
Well, I always tell this story about, I tell this on Kate's amazing podcast, about when I realized I needed to get help. So my ex-husband came home, and I went over to him and I got on my hands and knees on the ground. I'm a PhD. I am a doctor. And I get on my hands and knees and I beg him not to drink that night. And I'm looking, I remember at the hardwood floors, and I'm thinking, okay, he might be crazy because he's drinking, but I am crazy right now. Like, what am I doing? And I had this moment of, I have really lost it. And I am not acting rationally. And I was scared for myself because as you said, I think, Ben, like, I didn't know myself. I was like, who is this person who's really so out of control? And out of control and unpredictable, all these words I had been using to describe guess who, I noticed I was feeling myself. And so I realized I needed help. And so I had a dear friend who said, I bet, if you talk to other people who went through this, it might help. And I said, no. Like, either I felt too ashamed, or I felt like their stories would be not as bad as mine. Like, mine was so bad because I had such young kids. And so I got my ass to a church basement, and I sat there and I just made it through that one meeting. And I wanted to run out the entire time to an Al-Anon meeting. And then someone came over to me and said, oh my God, I loved hearing your story. Here's my phone number. And I was like, what? And I realized in that moment, how lonely I had felt the whole time. That I felt like I was some sort of repellent because I was so terrible, because I believe that because of my codependency, which means that there was no separation between me and my partner, I really thought I had caused his disease. So I felt so horrible about myself. And so I would say that if you're with someone who's struggling, first of all, you didn't cause it, you can't change it, and you're not going to cure it. And so get the support you need, because the situation you're in is really hard. So to get the support, and then lovingly and with a whole lot of compassion, look at how you can change you, because only person you can change is you. And I still wake up every morning and make a list in my head of the things I can control and the things I can't control. And the list of things I can control is much shorter than what I'd like to control on the other side. But I wake up every morning and I do that, and that grounds me. So that would be my message, which is that you're not alone. You're so not alone, and there is help. But you have to be compassionate with yourself first.
Kate?
I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. I had such a similar experience. I found myself in the corner of my apartment on the floor in the fetal position, rocking, hysterically crying, like, who is this person? And, that was, I don't know, 20 some odd years ago. And I don't recognize that person. I mean, I am not. And I similarly, crawled myself into a church basement and heard people's stories and heard thoughts and feelings that I had not even been able to identify in myself coming out of other people's mouths, and their stories were able to, like, they were dropping the penny over and over and over again, like, oh my God, that's what I feel. Oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's why I feel that way. And that went on for 10 years. I mean, really. And it's truly probably the most life-changing thing. I mean, it is categorically the most life-changing thing that has ever happened to me. And you're not alone. You're not at all alone. So I truly believe that, again, as Elizabeth said, taking the focus off the other person and putting it on yourself gives you so much. Here's the thing. I know a lot of people, and I think, Elizabeth, you can say the same thing. I know a lot of people who end up staying married to people who are addicts through that work. There are people who do that codependency recovery work on themselves and end up being able to be in this relationship with their, active alcoholic or addict. And, that's a miracle in and of itself, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to leave. It means that you're taking care of you and you're focusing on yourself.
Yeah. I think I saw someone wrote that they went through something like that. The first resource that I would really recommend, because if you feel comfortable going to an Al-Anon meeting, beautiful. But if you don't, I mean, the Bible, I think, is Melanie Beattie's Codependent No More.
100%.
And pick that up, and you're either, it either fits you or it doesn't, right? It's like the shoe fits or it doesn't. And just start being curious about it. I would recommend to the person who wrote in, and just know that it is a journey. And I go one day at a time for the rest of my life, just like an alcoholic. So it's an ongoing process of learning and relearning.
Yep.
One of the things that, and I just thought of this, and I don't know if this is, way off, but the idea, from what I know about Al-Anon, is that, Dr. Elizabeth, I think you brought it up, is that you can't control the other person. You can only control what you can control. And I think that whether you're quote unquote, codependent or not, I think maybe a recipe for a happy or better outcome with divorce is to at least understand that philosophy. Yes. I mean, is that somewhat in the ballpark?
Totally. I talk about that in my program. I recommend the women do that list that I said, because absolutely. And this comes up a lot, I find, with, I wonder, Kate, if this comes up for you too, and Susan, with co-parenting, that you just want to control what the other parent is doing. And you have this idea. And I always say, okay, first of all, they're getting something different from that other person. Like, my ex-husband is way more fun than me. Like, I'm very nurturing and very loving, but he's way more fun. Like, they get that from him. Like, the kids and pets, they need to have a balance. And so when we try to control or make our ex-partner a certain kind of parent, that's really a problem for them, for the ex, and for the kids. And so I would recommend anytime you're interacting with them to consider what you can control and when you can't control.
Absolutely. I had this thing with my ex too, when we got divorced, and I had been the stay-at-home mom, and so I was the one who took care of all the things, right? And he would call me and be like, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to do it. And I would just, all of my codependence training, right? I took my hands off it, and I was like, I'm sure you can figure it out. And because he is an intelligent human being, he figured it out. Did he do it the way that I would have done it? Probably not. And had I been there to watch it, maybe I would have had my brain would have broken a little bit, but I just had to take my hands off of it. If he bought the wrong gift for a birthday party, whatever. Like, is that really going to impact and affect my life? Right. If the kids go to bed, half an hour later at his house than at my house, if they watch TV before bed instead of reading books, how important is it? Really? And sometimes we can make them out now, it's really important because their brain development and blah, blah, blah. Really?
Right. Right. And really, how important is it? Is it important enough for you to engage in a behavior or thoughts that are going to lead to more resentment with your ex? Where you always have to ask, I think, this is like, we have teens, pick your battles. Like, is this something I want to go to battle for?
Yeah. Absolutely.
The principle of the thing.
What's that,
Right.
Susan?
You want to know how many times I've heard that as a divorce attorney? But it's the principle.
Oh gosh.
I call those the most expensive words in divorce.
But it's the principle.
Well, I think
It's
the general assumption that I tried to operate under was that I had to stop and say, would I rather be right or would I rather be happy? Right? I mean, that's that's at the bottom line. And I'm sure Nikki, if she were sitting here, she'd have some choice words too about the way that I parented. Because all of a sudden I was a single dad with a 4-year-old half the time,
Right.
and not knowing how to cook and not knowing how to feed myself or take care of myself. It was a crash course, but you know what? He made it, and he's still with us today.
And you made it. You figured it out.
Exactly.
And the thing is that we allow the other person the dignity
Yep.
of failing and figuring it out. If we're constantly there to control it or manage it or stop them from failing, they don't ever get to figure it out. And that's not
Exactly.
cool.
Exactly.
And
I always also like to say to people I say this all the time to the women in my program. Kids need inoculation, meaning I believe in vaccines. They need inoculation against disease, but they need inoculation for lots of different kinds of personalities. They are not going to have every boss and every roommate be like me. They're not going to have people in their life who are always anticipating their needs and being so sensitive. They're going to have a boss. So they need to know how to deal with a ton of people in this world. And so if they can get another piece of a person from their father or your ex-partner, that's a gift, because then they're learning how to manage someone like that. So I like to think of it that way.
Well, you brought up your program, Dr.
Oh,
Cohen.
yeah.
And
Talk about Afterglow.
First of all, the best name ever, Afterglow. And so tell us a little bit about what people can expect, or if they call you and sign up for it.
Yeah, thank you. So my program, Afterglow, is a program to help women in particular thrive, not just survive through your divorce. So it's a comprehensive therapeutic program of 13 videos that are basically as if you were to come to me as a therapist or any other therapist and really comprehensively help you move through both the loss and the joy that you will feel with your divorce. And so there's videos and there's worksheets. And I also have a membership where women come together and speak and support each other. It blows me away how many people how bringing just one woman in supports everybody in the system. And I have a book coming out in April, the same name. So it's called The Light at the Other Side of Divorce, Discovering the New You, based on that program as well. I'm really excited about that.
And let me tell you something. I know it's not coming out for a little bit, but I had the honor of reading the book, and it's a game changer. It's going to be a game changer. It's going to be, in my opinion, the manual for divorce. And if you're stuck, or just like your manual that comes with your computer, the troubleshooting, you can go to, the index and find out where you're stuck, and then go, and it's going to be phenomenal. So. Can't wait for that to happen. And Dr. Cohen, where can people get in touch with you and learn more about your program?
Yeah, people can find me at drelizabethcohen.com. And if you go to drelizabethcohen.com/stress-free divorce, you can get lots of tips on how to have a stress-free divorce from me.
That's great. And then, my co-host, is just not made for this. It really isn't. But thank you guys again, and Dr. Cohen, thank you. And one more time, if you need help or know somebody needs help, the SAMHSA hotline is coming up, 800-662-HELP. Again, 800-662-HELP. Susan, the
suicide prevention talk line, lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK, TALK.
I actually forgot one more thing I wanted to ask Kate and Elizabeth about your experience with your ex, and eventually, I think both of them ended up getting sober. Is that?
Mine was 8 years sober when I met him. So, yeah.
So Elizabeth, when your ex got sober, can you talk about the miracle that happened or the change that happened with him, as far as being, or
presumption?
Sorry. So let's see. I wasn't prepared for that question.
Yeah, you know what? Let's not talk about that one. Because I don't want to look. He's not here to tell his story.
I don't want to break his.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So that was a bad question, and he's not here to answer it, and it should have been asked to him. So I will leave that alone. I will tell you.
Face said it all.
What's that, Kate?
My face said it all.
Yeah. I should have just ended the show when I was going.
We were doing really well.
I know.
We were doing so well.
But anyways, thank you very much. Again, it's Dr. Elizabeth, your website one more time?
DrElizabethCohen.com, DR.
Okay. And you can listen to her on the Divorce and Beyond podcast that just came out Tuesday?
Oh, yeah. Susan's
It came out today. DivorceandBeyondPod.com or on any major podcast outlet.
And Kate and I talked on her podcast a lot about Al-Anon and codependency. So those people who are interested in that should definitely check that out too.
Definitely.
So, in closing, I think if you know somebody or you're struggling with addiction or mental health issues, that recovery is possible. We made the stat of some 25 million people are suffering from active addiction, but there are also millions who are in recovery, and life has been transformed in amazing ways beyond, personally, in my own experience, beyond my wildest imagination. And keep on trudging the road to happy destiny. So thank you guys. I appreciate it, and thank you for everything you guys do. We'll talk soon.